Hello, my name is Catinca. I'm a third-year medical student at Queen's University Belfast, and today we will be covering the topic of mental health in lockdown. Our objectives for this session will be to first of all give you some background into the problems and the scale of loneliness and isolation. Then we'll be looking at how COVID-19 has impacted on these problems. Then we'll be moving on to giving you our best tips and tricks on how to tackle a question on this topic in your upcoming medical school interview. And then we'll be summarizing with the key points, the key messages that we want you to take away from our session. Now, looking at the scale of the problem, before COVID-19, for example, in the United States of America, 27% of the adults aged between 50 and 80 were feeling isolated and lonely, and that is referred to as the hidden healthcare crisis. Now, during COVID-19, the numbers have increased, and as social distancing came into place, 41% of people aged 50 to 80 have reported feeling isolated and lonely. Also, financial worries may have compounded the problem and may have made everything worse. Now, looking at the issue this brings with it is the fact that there's going to be increased levels of mental health illness, such as depression or anxiety. And there has been one study conducted in the UK, which has reported that 30% of the United Kingdom adults who did not report a mental health disorder pre-COVID reported one in April 2020. So those are frightening numbers, and they are there to prove that the scale of the problem is absolutely enormous. Now, moving on to the second learning objective for our session today, looking at how COVID-19 has made these problems even worse. So how has COVID-19 actually made this worse? First of all, COVID-19 has brought with it physical isolation. The social isolation has increased physical and psychological isolation. So social distancing guidelines have impacted on people's mental health and on their well-being. Now, looking at social isolation, it has not been felt so badly due to social media and online digital communication. But what can we do to those people who do not have social media, who do not have access to internet, or who simply don't know how to use a laptop or a computer? Now, thirdly, the elderly were probably the worst affected. They have less digital connectivity and possibly fewer friends nearby. Also, they have the greatest risk of mortality, so they were the most frightened ones. They were the most vulnerable ones and also the most isolated. Now, looking at the youth group of people, they have been impacted through the closure of schools, universities, and other public places, and that has had a very detrimental effect on the young and the active population as well, because they were used to socializing. They were used to going to school every single day, and now all they had was online school and social media and nothing else. Now, looking at the main issues we should all take into consideration whenever we're thinking about mental health during lockdown, we need to take into consideration and to always remember that the elderly have been particularly affected, but the rest of the population has suffered as well. For example, from loss of jobs, financial difficulties, or even just being homebound. Then there are many types of isolation, and we should all be aware of this. There's social isolation, there's physical isolation, and there's also a third type of isolation, which is psychological isolation. Then we should always ask ourselves the questions of what kind of support is needed to fight the feelings of isolation. Will there be a population-wide mental health crisis in the future? Are we ready for that mental health crisis? Can we fight it from now? And then we should also ask ourselves, how can medical professionals help tackle the problem? So these are all questions and these are all aspects that will help you ace your interview, your medical school interview answer, if you know the answers to these questions, or if you at least reflect on these ideas. Now, moving on to our third learning objective, giving you the best tips and tricks on how to tackle a question on this topic in your medical school interview. This is a sample question that we have prepared for you, and if you'd like to pause the video now and have a thought of it, maybe scribble down some ideas that you might have to answer this question, and then when you're done with that, you can restart the video and I'm going to come back with our best tips and tricks for how to answer this question. So how to approach this question? First of all, you should start by identifying the issue. State the impacts of isolation on the well-being of people, and make sure that you're listing all of those 3 types of isolation that we were mentioning before. Secondly, you should make sure to take a very holistic approach and look at all possible ways you can help, from advice to practical actions. Now, thirdly, we are strongly encourage you, as for any other question, to offer an example. You should have experience. If you have any experiences or you have read about such an example, make sure to mention it. Even if it's something you've seen in a movie, even if it's something you've seen on the news, or even if it's something you've heard about from someone else, just make sure to mention it and link it to your question. Now, lastly, we would strongly encourage you to work within your limits. Make sure not to mention anything that you won't be able to handle, such as make everybody in the world happy or give everybody financial support, because that's just something you can't simply do, and that's not going to be a reasonable answer for your question. Now, moving on to our very last objective for today, we'll be summarizing and we'll be giving you the main messages to take away from our short session today. So first of all, we are advising you that mental health and social isolation are very, very hot topics at the moment. You should ensure that you are comfortable with this topic and that you have done your research for extra insight. Also, try and think of a number of personal examples you can use in your interview in case questions like this come up, because it's very likely that you have faced these feelings or you know someone who has struggled during lockdown, because we all have, haven't we? So use these experiences to shape your answers. And then lastly, but certainly not least, if you feel the need for further information, you can always use our website, theaspiringmedics.co.uk. And these are all of our objectives being met for today. Thank you.
Our one-to-one online interview tutoring offers a tailor-made service personalised to your specific universities and medicine interviews, including MMI, panel, and Oxbridge. Our expert tutors will enable you to articulate yourself, practice mock interview questions, as well as receive extensive feedback on your performance. You will also gain access to our online interview course with over 150 tutorials and over 200 exemplar answers.